So we're here tonight to talk about the interesting things that James Roddy brings us all the time, which are really interesting and sometimes frightening. But the thing that I want to present to everybody out here is that we're going to talk about some scary things tonight, maybe, and we'll make a little bit of humor about it. But it's all survivable, folks. Everything that people talk about out there that's all big and bad, it's all survivable. All you got to do is get prepared. You see all the green people in here and the green vests and everything. Those are the folks who are getting prepared. You can certainly ask them any questions you want to if you're not involved with CERT right now. And they'll get involved. I'd like to thank the college for letting us use the building here tonight. And for the CERT folks, and the Medical Reserve Corps folks, and for the Red Cross folks out there, and for CCTV for being in here tonight and recording all of this. We'll get some good passages as we go down through the years.
Can you hear me so hot?
And we're going to have fun tonight. It'll be about an hour or so presentation. And here we are. Going to move on a little bit. My name is Roger Stevenson, if you don't know who I am. And as we have the evening ending over, we'll have our folks outside out there where you can talk to them and so forth as we go along. So thank you for being here tonight. Without any great ado, Roddy.
And thank you, David. Thank you, CERT folks. I wandered around out in the middle of nowhere for like 20 minutes. It is dark out here. I have the new Apple map program on my phone. All the things you have heard about it are true. It is a nightmare. And thanks for coming out on a 12-12-12. So what were you guys doing at 12-12 today? Drop, cover, and hold, right? Wasn't that? No. Let's see if this is going to work. So, my name is James Roddy. I am the Director of Ready, Set, Prepare. I am the former Earth Sciences Information Officer for the Oregon Department of Geology and the former Director of Communications for the 5 chapters of the Oregon Red Cross. So, I have now kind of ventured off into waving my arms at crowds and encouraging communities to become disaster resilient. The more resilient and sustainable we make our communities, the quicker we are to recover from disasters. Now, everybody saw that 1938, 1940 video that was showing up there? That was from the last great hurricane to hit exactly the same place up in the Northeast that Sandy hit. Wow. Yes. So you're talking about just 2 generations removed. That had a 30 to 40 foot tidal surge. Sandy had a 15-foot tidal surge. It wiped out the same communities, Staten Island, the barrier islands in New Jersey, Rockaway, all the places that we've been hearing about, where people, in some instances, still don't have power. Well, it happened in 1938, and it was much, much worse. The good news was, back then, that's when the Works Progress Administration was going, and they had 100,000 volunteers that went to help the communities there. Today, we can't match that when we have a disaster. But once again, just 2 or 3 generations removed, and exactly the same thing happened to the homes and the people that are living there. So we tend to have a very, very short memory, institutional memory. And the stories from 1938 don't get passed on from generation to generation. And so we lose that knowledge. My whole thing is about being prepared. You're laughing. Let me tell you something. In a disaster, she who controls the toilet paper controls society. Think about it. If you haven't made your run to Costco, we get a big, big event. Let's say we get the big earthquake. This is what the shelves are going to look like. This was 2 days before Hurricane Sandy hit up in New York. And I guarantee you that's what it'll look like 30 minutes after we get a big earthquake. If you think you're going to beat folks down to the grocery store, you're out of luck. And if you waited Another day and you went to the grocery store up in the Northeast, that's what you were looking at. So you can imagine. And lines for gasoline as well. And you saw what people were having to do. Take a little 5-gallon can to the gas station because they weren't going to fill up your car for you because that was too much gas. When we have a big disaster, that's what happens. You get 5 gallons and they send you home. It's enough to run your generator if you've got one, but it's certainly not enough to leave the area if you haven't kept your car filled up. Now, I believe in being a slight bit of paranoia is a good thing. But I also believe in being prepared. And there are certain things, if we get a big disaster, that I am going to make sure that I've got lots and lots of, starting with alcohol, just because, and meds, because you really don't want to have to go through the aftermath of a big disaster without those kind of things. So, it's only 9 days till either the Mayan end of the world or what I like to think is coming, the zombie apocalypse. It's another type of disaster to prepare for. Velociraptor attacks, vampire bites, alien invasion. Why not? You have to do basically the same thing for all of them when you get prepared. So, kind of interesting. Yeah, this is pretty funny. The Jerks Guide. Yeah. And please, if you have questions, don't hesitate, because this is very, very informal and sometimes very silly. So, no, the world is not going to end on December 21st, as far as I know, although I did see a video from the Prime Minister of Australia, and she said it was. So, Google it. It's true. On YouTube. But December 21st is a great excuse to have a party. And it's just 9 days away. Combine it with your holiday parties. And I suggest for the theme, a little REM. Get you in the mood. So, after December 21st, this is what we're going to do. Anybody born after December 21st, we're going to tell them that the apocalypse really happened. That we fought the aliens and the zombies and we won. And anybody who denies it had their minds wiped by the aliens. Once we get this in the history books, nobody's going to be able to dispute it. So I want you guys to work on this. You know, wait maybe till the kids are 3 or 4 years old or 5 or 6. You could probably get away with it with some kids now and just tell them their minds were wiped. But so after December 21st, because he knows, that's what's going to happen. Sandy is going to go down as the second most expensive disaster in U.S. history. I've already heard a price tag of $75 billion, and it's still going up. The most expensive was what? Katrina. $150 billion, 2,000 lives lost, 1 million people displaced. This one didn't hold a candle to Katrina, but it got a whole lot more press because it hit the New York City area. But here's some excuses that people were giving. And this is typical of pretty much the whole population in the United States. It's never going to happen to me. If it does happen, somebody's going to be there to save me. The folks that went through Sandy found out real quickly there wasn't a group of white hats coming to save them. They were on their own. And in some instances, they were on their own for a week or 2 weeks. Here's some other excuses I heard in the news. I'm not leaving because looters are coming. And everything's fine. I've got no problem. Irene hit last year. It wasn't that bad. The other excuses we always hear are, there's nothing I can do, so why bother to prepare, and I'm too busy. I'll get to it later. Well, if you keep putting it off and keep putting it off, then you end up like the folks at Sandy. And Hurricane Sandy points out something that is becoming the new normal in the United States. They attributed about a foot of the 13-foot tidal surge to global warming. That's it. But what we do know is the billion-dollar disaster in the United States is the new normal. Last year, 2011, we had $14 billion disasters in the United States, highest in our history, totaling about $55 to $60 billion in damages. One storm this year, $75 billion in damage. We've had other billion-dollar disasters this year, but that's the biggest so far. This is the new normal. In the Pacific Northwest, we don't get a lot of billion-dollar disasters. We're pretty lucky that way. The last really, really big one was the floods in '96, Mount St. Helens in 1980, and the Columbus Day storm in 1962. And anybody here for the Columbus Day storm? What are your memories of that? Cars rolling into the parking lot by themselves. What I read about it was that if your home wasn't damaged, that was the exception in the Willamette Valley, not the rule. For example, in Lake Oswego, there were 7,000 homes in Lake Oswego in 1962. 75% of them were damaged or destroyed in that storm, 1962. So it happens. We get pretty much any type of disaster that can happen anywhere in the United States. Almsville, a great example, Marion County. 2010, 75 homes damaged, or 75 buildings damaged in a tornado. So it happens here. Kind of amazing. And while we don't get the billion-dollar disasters very often, we still get disasters that affect us. We forget that we live in an active volcanic mountain range within sight of active volcanoes. The geologic processes that have created this incredible landscape that we live in give us some pretty serious natural hazards. Here's an example. This is the 1980 eruption. Sent a plume of ash 15 miles up into the sky and dumped 500 million tons of ash all over a 3 or 4 state area, including Portland, but mostly eastern Washington. Over the last 4,000 years, there have been 57 major eruptions in the Cascades. The two most dangerous mountains in the Cascades are Mount Rainier and Mount Hood because of the close proximity to population centers. But the most active volcano is Mount St. Helens. The Cascade Range averages a couple of eruptions every century. So there is a real good chance that many of us in this room will see another eruption in the Cascades someplace. Most active volcano has been Mount St. Helens. And the day it goes, if it happens, and the wind's blowing from the north, we're going to end up with those 500 million tons of ash falling in the Willamette Valley. Something we didn't think we had to prepare for. Oh, and so where else in the United States can you walk a volcanic evacuation route in the morning and a tsunami evacuation route in the afternoon? Right? And then, of course, we throw in the zombie evacuation route because we know after December 21st that we're going to have these signs all over the place. And so here's a potential disaster that we didn't even realize could happen. If you were at Crater Lake in June of 2012, just this past June, you could have seen the aurora borealis, the northern lights, because we are in the midst of a solar storm. It started pretty much at the beginning of the year. and it'll extend into next year. The potential for severe geomagnetic storms, in NASA's words, could disrupt power grids, radio communications, and GPS, as well as sparking dazzling auroras. The solar storm that's going on right now doesn't hold a candle to the 1859 space weather event, scientists say, and that's a good thing. But the sun hasn't reached its peak yet. It's expected to reach its peak next year. And outbursts that are giving us things like the northern lights at Crater Lake could be a sign of things to come. This is video from the International Space Station of flying over the northern lights. What the astronauts say is when the northern lights are green tinged, they fly over them, but when the northern lights have a red tinge to them, they get to fly right through the northern lights. They extend that high up, 150 miles. Pretty amazing stuff. The sun has an active cycle, much like a hurricane season, said Tom Bogdan, director of the U.S. Space Weather Prediction Center. After hibernating for 4 or 5 years, not doing much of anything, the sun began waking up about a year ago. The scary thing about this is that scientists say that space weather prediction has some catching up to do. In other words, they're about as accurate as weather forecasters were for 50 years ago. The biggest solar storm in recorded history, that 1859 event, happened during a solar maximum about the same size as the one we're entering next year. During the 1859 event, northern lights were reported as far south as Cuba and Honolulu. The flares were so powerful that people in the northeastern United States could read newspapers just from the light of the aurora at night. U.S. telegraph operators, the internet of their day, reported sparks leaping from their equipment, some bad enough to set fires. If something similar happened today, the world's high-tech infrastructure would grind to a halt. What's at stake, Bogdan says, are the advanced technologies that underlie virtually every aspect of our lives. Basically, it fries every computer chip that runs everything. The good news, we get about a 20-hour warning. The bad news, there is no plan. I just want to make sure that you're as paranoid as I am. Pretty amazing. One of the reasons we're getting more and more billion-dollar disasters is people are moving to more dangerous places. We have a much larger population at the coast now than we did 10, 20, 30 years in our past. But we have many, many more people living in cities. And you concentrate in cities and things happen because you're concentrated, you're reliant on technology. And when the technology goes away, bad things happen. Amanda Ripley, she's a Time magazine correspondent. She's written a book called The Unthinkable: Who Survives When Disasters Strike and Why. I'm going to talk about this book a little bit later on, but she had some pretty interesting observations. We flirt shamelessly with risk today, constructing city skylines and hurricane alleys and neighborhoods on top of fault lines. Largely because of where we live, disasters have become more frequent and more expensive. But as we build even more impressive buildings and airplanes, we do less and less to build better survivors. More than 80% of Americans now live in or near cities and rely upon a sprawling network of public and private entities to get food, water, electricity, transportation, and medicine. We make almost nothing for ourselves, so a disaster that strikes one group of people is more likely than ever to affect others. But just as we have become more interdependent, we have also become more detached from our neighborhoods and traditions. This is a break from our evolutionary history. Humans and our evolutionary ancestors spent the past several million years living in small groups of relatives. We evolved through passing on our genes and our wisdom from generation to generation. But today, the kind of societal ties that used to protect us from threats get neglected. In their place, we've substituted new technology. which only works some of the time. Only after everything goes wrong do we realize we're on our own. And the bigger the disaster, the longer we will be on our own. No fire department, police department, EMS, or CERT team can be everywhere at once, no matter how good their gear. The other thing that's interesting to note is living in big cities means you forget there are things happening around you. Let's say there's a landslide in Salem. Well, it gets cleaned up after a week or two. And a month later, 2 months later, you can't see that there had been a landslide. If it had happened in a rural area, you might pass it for days and days, weeks, months, even years, like Highway 20 going to the coast. You're passing that for years and years to come, where it's sliding and sliding and sliding. But big cities, we just forget. And we don't pass on that knowledge of something bad has happened, we need to prepare for it. It's a matter of risk and how much risk you are willing to take for yourself and your family. If you don't prepare, you're taking on a pretty large amount of risk. So any given year, in or out, what's the biggest disaster threat that families and businesses face in Oregon? Face around the United States? Not flood? Not earthquake? Fire. Home fires and business fires. The vast, vast, vast majority of calls that the Red Cross responds to, probably 95% of all of the calls that the Red Cross responds to across the country, 70,000 times a year, are home fires. This was a dryer fire. The dryer vent caught on fire. I have friends who went out to dinner with their kids. Their Sony television set caught on fire and burned their house down, and they returned and their house was gone. Makes you think. Oh, and by the way, don't tweet until you get out of the building. But once again, we've all got smoke alarms. Some of us probably even can find a fire extinguisher because you kind of saw it underneath the sink a couple of weeks ago, but it's been a few years and you're not even sure if it works or not. Well, we've got to do better than that. We have to have a plan, and that's a really good place to start, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well, is with just the fire safety plan. The highest impact event that we can expect at some point in our future that has a fairly low probability is an earthquake. And it's only in the last 25 years or so that we've known, scientifically speaking, that we had the potential to get one of the largest earthquakes on Earth, because we now know there's a 700-mile long earthquake fault that sits off the coast about 75 miles, stretching from Northern California to southern British Columbia. And it's an active earthquake fault. And when it lets go in a big, big way. But we don't get a lot of earthquakes in Oregon. That's the problem. How do you prepare for something that doesn't happen very often? In our recorded history, stretching back to the 1850s, we've only had these earthquakes. The largest were a couple in Klamath Falls within a couple of hours of each other in 1993, magnitude 6s, did about $10 million worth of damage. The Milton Freewater along the state line in 36, and the magnitude 5.6 Scotts Mills earthquake. How many of you felt that one? Yeah, that was a pretty good ka-chunk early in the morning. A lot of people felt like a truck hit the building or somebody bumped into the house with a big thing. That was an earthquake that just lasted for about 5 seconds, magnitude 5.6. But nevertheless, it did $30 million worth of damage. We're not ready for things like earthquakes. We don't get them often enough to make us even think about it. This isn't California, who gets dozens and dozens of times more earthquakes than we do. And in many ways, they're not ready in California either. But what we do know is there's a tiny remnant of a very ancient oceanic plate called the Juan de Fuca plate. Used to be the largest plate on Earth, tectonic plates, rafts, everything's moving. But this one's been diving under North America for 150 million years. As North America moves west at about an inch a year, the Juan de Fuca plate is moving east at about an inch a year. Where the two plates meet is the continental shelf. The interesting thing is, where these two plates come together is a 700-mile-long earthquake fault. The oceanic plate is heavier than the continent, so it's diving under North America, but it's not a smooth process, even though it's just moving at an inch a year. They get hung up and they lock together, and the pressure builds for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And an inch this way and an inch that way starts to add up. What we now know, after about 25 years of research, is this is an active earthquake fault. It's exactly the same kind of fault that sits off the coast of Japan that caused that magnitude 9 earthquake last year. The same fault that sits off the coast of Chile that caused the magnitude 8.8 earthquake in 2010, and the magnitude 9.2 earthquake that hit Alaska in 1964. And when it goes, about half the time, the whole thing ruptures. The last time it happened was, well, we'll get to that. This has the potential to create earthquakes that last a long time and use a lot of energy. This earthquake would be felt over millions of square miles. They would feel this earthquake in Anchorage, Alaska, and Salt Lake City. It's big. What we know from the geologic record is this earthquake fault has ruptured 20 times in the last 10,000 years, where the whole thing has let go. It's created anywhere from a magnitude 9 to a magnitude 9.2 earthquake. These types of earthquakes, subduction zone earthquakes, are the largest earthquakes on Earth when they happen. So that's about once every 500 years or so if you go on the average. But these earthquakes don't happen on average. Sometimes they can be 500 or 600 years apart, and sometimes they can be a couple of hundred years apart. There's new research that's come out just in the last few years by Dr. Chris Goldfinger with Oregon State University, where he found that just the southern part of the subduction zone ruptured independently of the whole thing. Another 19, 20 times or so, 10 to 20. This is still a little bit controversial. The U.S. Geological Survey has a lot of scientists who aren't willing to recognize that it's happened 20 times in the past, but they'll give it at least 10 times. These make about magnitude 8.5 to about magnitude 8.8 earthquakes, except they're happening right off the coast of Oregon. When you add up the two, that's 30 to 40 times in the last 10,000 years. That's about once every 250 to 330 years apart, and the last one that occurred, we know down to the hour, January 26, 1700. And we know down to the hour because they found written records in Japan of a tsunami that struck their coast without being associated with an earthquake. They know what happens when they get big earthquakes. It generates tsunamis. Sometimes that institutional knowledge does not get passed on from generation to generation. That's what we saw last year. But they realized that this tsunami that struck their coast in 1700 had to have come from someplace else. The research that went into that was published in 1995, just 17 years ago. It was still a 20-foot wall of water when it got to Japan. It came from the Pacific Northwest, from a magnitude 9 earthquake, and the tsunami traveled across the Pacific at 500 miles an hour, hitting Japan 10 hours later. This sounds like a pretty scary earthquake, but it's completely different than what we think of as California-type earthquakes. California-type earthquakes are hard, violent shaking. The earthquake that hit San Francisco in 1989, magnitude 7.1, And the earthquake that hit Northridge, the Los Angeles area in 1994, that was a magnitude 6.7, 6.8, lasted 15 seconds. That's it. The one in Los Angeles did about $20 to $30 billion in damage in 15 seconds. This earthquake, when it happens, will last 5 minutes. Yeah, that sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? But once again, it's a different type of earthquake. And here in the Willamette Valley, we're 150 miles from the epicenter. The fault is going to be rupturing 75 miles offshore. Now, there's new research that indicates that it may actually, the fault zone may actually come up and under the coast range. Let's hope that's not correct. But here's what it looks like. These folks are in the magnitude 9 earthquake, about the same distance away from where the earthquake fault is rupturing there as we are in the Willamette Valley. I would not be in this place. Good goodness. But look, they're standing around. Things are shaking. But it's not stopping. It's actually coming in waves. Shakes harder, shakes a little softer. Shakes harder, shakes a little softer. The building's not falling down though. They're just now, after about 45 seconds, getting under the desks. After a couple of minutes, they decide to leave the building. I would not leave that building for anything. And you heard what he said, oh, I feel safer out here. Oh my goodness.
That is the biggest earthquake to date. It is still going. Oh my God, the building's gonna fall.
Once again, kind of waves, earthquake waves coming and going. Once again, these are folks about 150 miles from the epicenter. The building's not falling down, but things are shaking. Things aren't even falling off shelves for the most part. Well, at this point. An office building. People are just sitting at their desks. Now, Japan does get the most earthquakes of any place on Earth, of about 360 a day, but still, just gonna sit here. Yeah, maybe it'll stop in a while. But it never did. This earthquake lasted 6 minutes. Pretty amazing. But the good news is, it wasn't shaking that hard, was it? That's because these types of earthquakes generate long period earthquake waves 150 miles from the epicenter. Now, certainly there may be surges of earthquake waves where it's going to shake harder than that. But what it means for us is wood frame homes are able to absorb these long period earthquake waves, the sideways motion. So wood frame homes do really well in these types of earthquakes. Concrete and steel reinforced buildings do pretty well in these types of earthquakes. It's the old brick and mortar buildings in our beautiful downtown historic districts and a lot of old apartment complexes that suffer damage because they can't handle this motion. The bad news is these types of earthquakes are hell on infrastructure. We expect to see, because we saw it in Chile, we saw it in Japan, massive damage to roads and bridges, power out, communications disrupted, possibly for weeks, just like power disrupted for weeks. Water lines, sewer lines, gas mains, all those kind of things take a big hit. Well, think about it. Long bridge, long period earthquake waves, the bridge begins to resonate with these long period waves and wants to dance with them, and then they fall down. Same thing with long rigid pipes. they break because they're dancing with these long period waves. So we survived the earthquake just fine. It's the aftermath of the earthquake that is the problem. And that's what you prepare for, is for the aftermath of the earthquake. Oh, sorry. Here's what we know about Cascadia earthquakes. It's not going to shake as hard, but it's going to shake longer than you ever thought possible. You'll probably get bored at some point. Yeah, sit back down on the couch and just let it shake. Go outside and watch the waves come towards you. If you're in a park, you're in a great place to watch it because you'll be able to see 6 or 7 foot waves coming across the ground towards you or away from you. Pretty amazing stuff. Home's going to be probably okay. But you're not getting to the grocery store. You're probably not getting to the office, any of those kind of things. The vast majority of buildings will survive. But nevertheless, there's still going to be tens of thousands of buildings damaged. It's very rare to get buildings pancaking in earthquakes like this, but it certainly could happen. The latest HAZUS run, how many buildings did it say would be damaged in Marion County? Do you remember? That's all? 800? So, see, not too bad. The problem is you're not going anywhere. If there's damage to roads and bridges, if the power's out, they're not pumping gas. How many gas stations do you know of that have generators? You're not going anywhere. You've heard that old rule, never let your gas tank get under half full. This is why. And the folks up in the Northeast learned that lesson in a big way as well. So, not going anywhere, and this earthquake affects 13 million people. Everybody west of the Cascades from Northern California through southern British Columbia gets shaken and sees damage. 80 or 90,000 square miles. It takes a long time to mount a response for an event like that. They pre-positioned supplies and people for Hurricane Sandy. And still, in many neighborhoods, it was a week before anybody saw any help. It'll take a week for them to just get their act together to begin bringing people in. And if roads and bridges and rail lines are damaged, we certainly expect the I-5 corridor to cease to exist as a transportation corridor. And nobody's really sure how long it will take to reopen it. I-84 will be closed as well because there will be landslides along I-84 as well as overpasses collapsing. So we're kind of cut out in Oregon. The coast completely cut off. Highway 101 gone, all the roads across the Coast Range gone. We tell communities, you're on your own for probably 3 weeks till they can get Navy ships off the coast to begin evacuating people. Gets pretty serious. But if you've got Mormon friends, then you can go hang with them because they're prepared. How many of you have your emergency supplies at home? Woo, good for you. All right, the people that didn't raise your hands, get to know these people. They're nice people, they will share for a while, but they really want you to get prepared as well. What else? Yeah, this is the one that everybody forgets. There was a magnitude 7.7 aftershock in Japan this last week. 7.7. The earthquake that hit Sumatra in 2004, there have been magnitude 8+ aftershocks just last year, 6 years later. So we can expect aftershocks of magnitude 6, magnitude 7, magnitude 8. That means the bridges, they're not opening any bridges because they've got to inspect the bridges for people to use them. And if they're big aftershocks, how many of you have to cross even a small bridge to get to work or to get home or get to school? Right. You know, small damage to one of those small bridges pretty much means you're maybe confined to your neighborhood. We'll talk about that.
Sir,
Yes? Yeah, so how can you tell it's an aftershock and not a new earthquake? Well, because it's either happening in the same place that the big earthquake happened, that magnitude 9.1, or it's happening adjacent to where the earthquake happened. Yeah, so the earthquake in Sumatra ruptured a 600-mile long chunk of the seafloor. And so all the aftershocks have been in that same area. The aftershock that just hit Japan was actually 75 miles farther out to sea than the big magnitude 9 earthquake that hit in March of last year. But it was still an aftershock. There were actually 4 shocks for the one in Japan. They had a magnitude 7.2 earthquake 2 days before the big one let go. But nobody knew it was a foreshock until the big one happened. That's the problem with these events. You don't know till after the fact. I say I'm not prepared because intellectually I talk about this all the time. I've got all the supplies at home. We got plans out the wazoo. Emotionally, I can't imagine this happening to me. It will never happen to me. That's just, how do you comprehend an event like this? It's really, really tough. So, bottom line, because we've only known for about the last 25 years or so, we're the first generation that understands the risks and consequences of one of these giant earthquakes. And what that means for us is the better we prepare, the better our life's going to be in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. It's going to take a long time to recover, but how well you prepare determines your quality of life after the event is over. It means we have to share this knowledge. We have to become storytellers. We have to help our communities begin creating this resilience that we're going to need for an event like this. All these CERT people have taken a step, but it's easy to do. There's all kinds of simple things that you guys can do to begin preparing. Take a first aid CPR class from the Red Cross. That's a good way to start. Have your kids take babysitting classes from the Red Cross. Get pet first aid from the Red Cross. I mean, all kinds of things like that. You know, start on your emergency plan. In fact, I have, and I put it outside on one of the tables out there, and I've got some more copies that I can put down here. I've got some reference books. Here are 4 simple things that you can do this week to begin getting prepared. The first one is make an out-of-state contact that knows how to text. We are told that you're not going to be able to make phone calls in-state, but you may be able to text or tweet out-of-state. Find somebody that knows how to do that. If you're over 30 years old and don't know how to text or tweet, find somebody under 30 to teach you, because it may be, unless you are a ham operator, the only way that you will be able to communicate after a big disaster. They had the same problem in Sandy. Cell service wiped out, internet service wiped out. But people were still texting and tweeting. Same thing happened in Japan. Turn your phone into the most important safety tool. Now, this figures you've all got smartphones at this point. And if you don't have smartphones at this point, you're Luddites, and you need to get with the program, because 5 years from now, that's all that there's going to be. So you might as well bite the bullet now and get your smartphone. But smartphones can be incredible. You can put emergency contacts in them. You can have first aid CPR instructions. You can have a flashlight built into your phone, just a flashlight app that lights up the whole screen. It has GPS tracking in it. You can put in an in case of emergency app. You can create lists of rally points, prescription medicines, food and medical allergies, so that you've got all that information right in your hand. Keep photos of loved ones and pets on your phone. If you are displaced from your pet, if your pet goes missing in a disaster and you head down to the shelter, they're not giving you your pet back unless you can prove it's yours. And the best way to prove it's yours is to have a picture of it with you in the picture, both of you together. That's pretty much solid proof that the pet belongs to you, or you stole it and it still belongs to you. You can set up what's called a Dropbox. That's an app where you can use the cloud. Basically, put your important documents, mortgage and insurance stuff, in the cloud where you can access it with your phone or a computer anywhere in the world. And you've got that information at your fingertips. Now, it may not be real useful in the aftermath of a giant earthquake, but if it's a lesser disaster and you have to leave your home because of flooding or a fire or something like that, you've got all those documents safe and retrievable. If you still refuse to get a smartphone, there are some alternatives. This company that makes the, I'll get to that in just a minute. Here's some apps that you can download for free onto your smartphone. The Red Cross has a great first aid app. I mean, it's got everything in it. They've also got an earthquake app. And it will not only tell you where the earthquake has happened, how big it was, but it will also identify shelters in your area and give you more information. It'll help you during the earthquake, after the earthquake, and it'll give you kind of psychological first aid as well, ideas. Here's a couple more apps that are free. The ICE Standard. This is a great one. You make this your home screen. And so let's say you're in a car accident and you're unconscious. The paramedics arrive, they grab your phone, they turn it on, there's all of your medical information, your doctor, your hospital, your insurance, and off you go. Just from having that ICE app. It will also identify, is that the one? The iTriage will do that. It'll identify the closest hospitals as well. So if you're not having paramedics arrive, then you've got that information. This one costs about $4, but it's the Pet First Aid app, and it's the best one online from Jive Media. So if you want to know how to give your cat mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, this is the app for you. Doesn't that sound like fun? All right, so if you still refuse to get a smartphone, there's a few things that you can do. These folks call the Go Stay Kit. I got one, and it was called the Ready Book. And it's the same idea. All the information, there's a place to put a picture of your pet, emergency numbers, important papers that you can tuck in here, copies of them, the whole 9 yards. So at least you've got something with you. You can also get a little, from the Red Cross again, pocket first aid guide that's printed on like waterproof paper and tear-proof paper. And then, do y'all still have the little passport go kit things? These are really interesting. These are from Oregon Emergency Management, and Marion and Roger at Salem Emergency Management has these things. Take it to your pharmacist and say, please put a label for all of my prescription medicines in this book. And then you keep it with you, and if you happen to be someplace and you can't get home and there's a disaster and you end up at a shelter, you got this book with you, you take it over to the nurse or the doctor and say, I need these prescriptions. And they're right there and the expiring date. So that's not a bad idea either. Real simple things. Easier to do it in a phone, but what the heck. What else? This is number 3. Visit this website, The Burning House. It's a fascinating website. The premise is, if you only had a few minutes because your house is on fire, what are the most important things that you would grab? People take pictures of the most important things and then they post them on this website. This is a great way to begin a conversation about preparing. Sit down at the dinner table. All right, I have a 15-year-old daughter. She's plugged in. I unplug her. Sarah, if you only had a few minutes, what are the most important things that you would want to grab if you had to leave the house and you couldn't go back in. She put them all together. She put them in a suitcase under her bed. There's still things that she uses. She gets them out. She puts them back. But think about that. That gets you thinking about putting an emergency plan together as well, because now you're thinking about, okay, well, I really want to make sure my laptop goes with me and my camera goes with me, and I've got 2 or 3, special mementos that I want to make sure I have, but I need to plan a little bit better than that, and now the planning process begins. But this is a great way to start the conversation. And then finally, read this book. This book will save your life. This book teaches you how to survive. It trains your brain, gives you a disaster personality. And here's some of the things that it does. And this is what Amanda Ripley talks about. And we've done that tonight. Calculate your risk. Because once you understand your risks, you're not going to be as afraid to get prepared for those risks. In the little flyer that I put together, there was a piece called, I mentioned, a breathing exercise. I gave a business seminar about a month ago. And as part of the business seminar, I brought in a friend of mine who is a master yoga instructor. And she sat everybody down in the business seminar and taught them a breathing exercise to relieve anxiety. In a bad situation like a hurricane or a fire or an earthquake, you want to be able to think clearly. Well, this breathing exercise, which is also used by firefighters and police and other people responding to really bad situations, you use a breathing exercise like this to get yourself back and centered, and you can deal with whatever's happening in a much clearer fashion. This is a video from Dr. Merkala that talks a little bit about
and to put the tip of your tongue up against the back of your front teeth, and you keep it there through the entire breathing process. So then you're going to breathe in on a count of 4. You breathe in through your nose and you breathe in silently. Then you hold your breath for a count of 7, and then you exhale all your breath on a count of 8. And when you're exhaling, you make an audible swoosh with your tongue still at the tip of the mouth, right behind your front teeth. You keep it the entire practice. So you're going to do that for a total of 4 times. I personally think one of its greatest values is to combine it with meals. You want to do it at least twice a day, but most of us eat 3 meals a day.
So basically, the process is to sit up relatively straight in your chair, at least for the first time you do this, and to put the tip of your tongue up against the back of your front teeth, and you keep it there through the entire breathing process. So then you're going to breathe in on a count of 4. You breathe in through your nose and you breathe in silently. Then you hold your breath for a count of 7, and then you exhale all your breath on a count of 8. And when you're exhaling, you make an audible.
Kind of interesting. My friend Robin taught us a different one. It was breathing in a box. So you breathed in for 6 beats, you held it for 6 beats, you breathed out for 6 beats, and you held it for 6 beats. And you did that over and over and over. I've got this video on my website, readysetprepare.org, so you can look at it. It really works, and people swear by this. All right. Another thing that Amanda talks about is that resilience thing, because people who think they can affect the outcome of a bad situation actually can in some instances. It's having that positive attitude and finding meaningful purpose in life isn't a bad thing either. Get in shape, because what helps you in real life helps you in a disaster. And another one, get to know your neighbors. You're only as prepared as the least prepared family in your neighborhood. So, do y'all have Map Your Neighborhood? Yes. City of Salem has Map Your Neighborhood. It's a great program where you basically sit down with your neighbors and find out who's got the power tools, who's got the chainsaw, who's got some medical training, who's got the wine cellar. That's the house you're hanging out at after the disaster. Have a potluck and invite everybody over. Do a prepareware party where you get together with your neighbors and you put emergency kits together. Those just really simple ideas, but get the conversation started. It's better to do it at the potluck after you've had 4 or 5 beers. People might actually listen to you. But you get the idea. And I say you're only as prepared as the least prepared family, because think about it, we get the big earthquake. 95% of everybody that's helped or rescued in an earthquake, 95% is helped by their neighbors. That's why you want to get to know them. And after the earthquake is over, if you're not prepared, your neighbors are going to come and check on you. And if you're prepared, you're going to do the same thing for them. You're going to go check it out. So as Roger and some of you other folks have heard me say before, bake some cookies. Find that really neighbor that you don't really know that well. Go over to his house, knock on the door. Hey, Charlie. Better yet, case of beer. Hey, Charlie, I really hate the fact that you guys party all night long, but here's a case of beer. Rescue me first. Cookies work the same way. Get to know your neighbors, because if we get a big event like that really, really big earthquake and roads are damaged, you're in your neighborhood for a while.
Now the beer, is that the good beer or the cheap beer?
They get the cheap beer. No. I'm saving my my micro brews for, yeah. So you want to stash, your wine and your beer in a place where nobody can find it if they're hanging out at your house. That's the thing. So, disasters are inevitable. What people forget is they are personal. They're happening to you and your family and your friends. And it doesn't matter whether it's a car accident, a home fire, or a catastrophic magnitude 9 earthquake, it's still happening to you. And the better prepared you are for an event like that, the better off you're going to be. It's the survival part that's optional. So I've just got a couple more things. I'll leave you with one of these, which is a modern tale of survival in the Pacific Northwest, one of my favorite bedtime stories.
Dave, there's no such thing as Yetis.
Yeah, pretty neat. All right, so here's something I want you to remember living in the Pacific Northwest.
Civilization exists by geologic consent, subject to change without notice.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, David. Thanks, CERT folks, Red Cross. I saw Marion County Medical Services, Medical Reserve Corps. Yes. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. If you got any questions, be happy to answer them. Roger, anything to add?
No, I want to tell you folks that this man here does a wonderful job. As you all know, you came out for this presentation, and I think we need to owe him a...
Well, thank you.
You all taken the time to say, do we have a kit, right? And a lot of you raised your hands, and some of you didn't. The other side to that question is, how many of you have camping gear and can spend that 2 or 3 weeks? So some people that have no kit have camping gear. Every time I ask that question, then they feel much better and you just need to change their camping gear to the surf stuff. And you're ready to go. But this is real, it's happening, it's gonna happen, and we need to really be prepared. He puts it very well for us. This is going to be done on the CCTV, so we'll be able to codify it that way and have it available for others who are here tonight. Are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
I had seen the Cascadia magazine for January where they draw the parallels with Japan, and it happened to say 600-mile zone. Has that changed? Was that a typo? Do you think 700?
600 to 700. So the question was, how long is the Cascadia Zone actually? And so it sounds more dramatic 700. But if the scientists say 600, I mean, I've heard 650. You know, it's fairly well constrained on the southern end because that's the Mendocino Triple Junction down there off the coast of Cape Mendocino. The northern end is not quite as well defined. We had a big swarm off Queen Charlotte Island a couple of months ago. Right, so that was outside of the Cascadia Subduction Zone. So they were getting some magnitude 7s and 5s and 4s and stuff. So. Wow. So silence, that's always a good sign. Yes?
You mentioned earlier about something occurring, you hope they were wrong, that the actual, was it epicenter or something, would occur maybe under the coastal?
So, yeah, so the question is, how wide is the rupture zone? So in Japan, the seafloor, it was a 300-mile long rupture, but it was 100 miles wide. There's new research that's just come out in the last year or so that is suggesting that the rupture zone, instead of being 50 miles wide, may extend from 75 miles off the coast all the way under the Coast Range to the edge of the Willamette Valley. That would make it 150 miles wide. What does that mean? Nobody really knows at this point. It could mean that it's going to shake a little bit harder. But the research that they're doing is very, very speculative at this point. They're kind of guessing because nobody knows, because the rupture zone under the Coast Range, the slab that's under the Coast Range is 25 miles down. So how hard does it shake when it's 25 miles down and much more viscous than brittle, the part that we know is going to rupture? So it's interesting. It's the best studied subduction zone anywhere in the world, and we're still learning stuff pretty much every year about it that we didn't know before. But we still don't know when it's going to happen. Yes, ma'am. Back there.
On the radio station, it said that the government had lowered the numbers, so if it was a 6.2, it was actually a 7.2. Do you know anything about that?
Which earthquake?
All of them.
Just the ratings.
The ratings.
Oh, okay, so the question was, what are the ratings? Well, we're all familiar with the Richter scale. Charles Richter holding up a ruler to the squiggly line and measuring the earthquake, and that's how the Richter scale got involved. Well, over the last 30 years or so, there's been this invention called computers. Yeah. And now scientists use a different scale, moment magnitude scale. And that is a scale that measures the energy released in an earthquake. Now, the Richter scale is fairly accurate. We're all familiar with it. For every whole number, you go up 10 times bigger earthquake. And it's logarithmic, 10 times 10 times 10. The moment magnitude scale is 30 times more energy released. So a magnitude 7 would be 1,000 times, basically 1,000 times bigger than a magnitude 5. It would take 1,000 magnitude 5 earthquakes to equal a magnitude 7 earthquake. 30 times 30 times 30 times 30, it's actually 31 point something. So the Richter scale works just fine, and if you hear newscasters using the Richter scale, you can turn to a friend or family member and say that person is an idiot. Because scientists don't use the Richter scale, but newscasters still do. And the problem with the Richter scale is once you get up past about magnitude 8 earthquakes, the Richter scale doesn't work because the squiggly line is bouncing into the top and bottom of the squiggle thing. So that's why they switched to the moment magnitude scale. And so the initial release of how big an earthquake is can change once the data is reviewed. It can go up, it can go down. That was a long answer.
It has to do with gravity. How much movement is there in gravity? So how much weight, how many times will gravity move? It's a moment magnitude. So there's different numbers, but the 30 that he says is very impressive when you start getting up to, we've all been in 6s and 7s. Well, there's an 8 and a 9. So what would that be? 30 times 30. Is that 900? Times more power released in a 9 than there is in a 7. So if you've been in a 7, 900 times more power.
Yeah, so the Scotts Mills earthquake, magnitude 5.6. A magnitude 9 would be 700,000 times bigger than a magnitude 5.6. But that's the energy release. That's not the shaking. The moment magnitude scale does not measure shaking. There's actually an intensity scale for that. Yes, sir?
Since we're expecting a long wave earthquake action, how do you best prepare your wood frame house for surviving that?
So the question is, since we know that this type of earthquake generates long period earthquake waves, how do you prepare your home? Well, if you've got a home that's built before the 1970s, early 1970s, when the building codes started to change, it may not be bolted to the foundation. So that'd be one place to start, is make sure your home is bolted to the foundation. If you've got your home over a garage and the walls in the garage don't look real sturdy, then you want to reinforce the walls in the garage to fix that open space. Bolting your water heater to the wall, putting flexible hoses on your water heater, those kind of things. And there's great materials. City of Salem, Roger has stuff outside, lots and lots of stuff that will help you kind of get started with that. And then the Red Cross has Together We Prepare. This is pretty comprehensive, covers just about any type of disaster. So that's where you start, and you Google any of this stuff, and it'll give you lots and lots of ideas. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Sir.
if anybody hasn't seen on YouTube, if you look up Japan early warning, there is a video of a gentleman and his wife were recording a program on TV, and about 20 seconds before the earthquake happened, there was an earthquake alert with the little doo-doo tone that you hear on Japanese television. And they said it said in Japanese, the shaking will start momentarily, and you see the people on TV, it was a live broadcast. And he started shaking, and the people on the show, it was a town hall meeting, were also experiencing the shaking. My question is, why hasn't the U.S. decided to get an early warning system like that? Because
why? And the question, yes.
It's a difference between the S&P wave, which
Yes,
is,
the primary wave and the shear wave. Yes. So the question is, why don't we have an early warning system for earthquakes like they do in Japan? Japan's got the only one at this point for earthquakes and for tsunamis. And there were actually people that got a 80-second warning before the ground started shaking. And 20 seconds, 30 seconds doesn't sound like much. All of the television and radio stations and all of the cell phones sold after 2010 are all tied to the Japan Meteorological Agency, and so people get instant messages. The primary wave is traveling at 11,000 miles an hour. The shear wave, the secondary wave, the surface wave that causes the damage is traveling about half that speed. So depending on how far you are from the epicenter of the earthquake, you can get up to a minute warning before the ground starts shaking. Doesn't sound like much, but it's in Japan. They can stop all the bullet trains, all the public transportation. They can get everybody off elevators. You can get out of bad buildings and into a safe place in a minute. So it works. But do we need an early warning system like that? The earthquake that hit Virginia last year, magnitude 5.6, 5.7. People that were at the epicenter of that earthquake in Virginia started tweeting their friends. Their friends in New York City got the tweets 40 seconds before the ground started shaking. So we already have a built-in warning system. If the Cascadia Subduction Zone begins to rip itself apart, most scientists think it will start off the coast of Northern California. Your friends can text you or tweet you, and you'll get about a minute warning before it starts shaking here. Seattle will get a couple of minutes warning. The NOAA is looking at, they're spending about $20 million to try to put in a tsunami warning system at the coast like they have in Japan. This was the first time that the Japanese earthquake warning system was really put to the test, and it failed. The problem was the rupture wasn't a single long rupture. It was actually 3 separate ruptures that happened within seconds of each other. So the initial report, especially for the people on the northern coast of Japan, was this is a magnitude 7.9 earthquake. The wave's going to be about 20 feet high. Please evacuate. But a lot of Japanese coastal communities have seawalls and river barriers and things like that. And so a lot of people didn't leave because they knew their 30 to 40 foot seawall was going to save them. Well, a few minutes later, the people at the Japanese Meteorological Agency realized this was not a magnitude 7.9. It was a magnitude 8.9, 9.0. By then it was too late because the wave was already arriving. So they got to figure that out. It was a matter of overwhelming their sensors with so much shaking because the Japanese never believed that they would ever get an earthquake this size. They actually had 3 improbable events happen one on top of another. And when you talk about not being prepared for disasters, every scientist pretty much and every government official in Japan said it can never happen.
Well, the Tokyo earthquake in 23 was not a subduction zone, was it?
But it was still the Kanto earthquake. That was offshore, though. It generated a tsunami that killed thousands of people. So but it killed 140,000 people or so. But it was the fire that killed most of the people in that event. So it's the improbable event, a magnitude 9 earthquake, a wall of water that was up to 77 feet high hitting the northern coast, and a nuclear power plant melting down. 3 improbable events happening just like that. So the thing that keeps me up at night is we get this really big earthquake here. What are the other improbable events that will piggyback onto this magnitude 9 earthquake?
Volcanoes.
Yay! And volcanic eruptions have been triggered by big earthquakes. Crustal faults inland have been triggered by these types of earthquakes.
Might happen in the wintertime with the volcano and the giant snow melt.
Yeah, it could really be something. But it's so improbable we can't think of it. That's the problem.
We don't want it.
Yes, sir.
Wanted to know if you know anything about the area around the sisters.
Okay, so the question is, what's this area around the sisters? Well, about 10 or so years ago, the geologists that were using a French satellite to fly over the Cascades saw that over the course of a few years, saw that there was a bulge growing on the edge of South Sister, about 10 miles around. And it was because a plug of magma had moved up to about 5 miles below the Earth's surface and was causing this bulge. And for about another 5 years, it continued to bulge, and there were actually some microquake swarms. But about 3 or 4 years ago, it stopped bulging, which was very disappointing to the volcanologists, because they figured, they were going to get to see the formation of a new volcano in the Sisters. And it hasn't begun moving again, so they basically said it's back to sleep. But that plug of magma is still sitting there 5 miles below the surface, and it could reactivate any time.
The other immediate threat is Yellowstone. Friend of mine is a geologist, and that.
Right, so the other immediate threat is Yellowstone. About 675,000 years ago was the last time Yellowstone erupted. It was the largest eruption in the history of the world. It was like 25,000 cubic miles of material that were ejected into the atmosphere. If that happens, life on Earth is gone. So don't worry about it. Just enjoy it. And yes, sir.
But we do have that minute warning. What's the best way to spend it?
I'm going and I'm hugging my flat screen TV. All right, let's moving it someplace nice and safe. It's get your family to a safe place under a desk or table if you get a minute warning for the earthquake. And actually, we probably will, because we'll feel the primary wave come through. That'll be the first kind of jolt, and then things will settle down. And then the secondary, the shear waves arrive. And those are the ones that cause the damage. So we will get a warning that this is happening. Put yourself in a safe place. All right, yeah, kind of. So, and I get under a sturdy table or desk. Some of you may have heard of the Triangle of Life. Yes? The Triangle of Life, which is an internet hoax, circulates every time there's an earthquake. And the guy that came up with this and is a really, really bad person, the cop, I won't use his name, says that do not, in the United States, do not get under a sturdy table or desk in an earthquake, because it will collapse and you will die 100% of the time. Instead, get down next to a sturdy table or desk, because the rainbow ponies from Candyland will come down and create a magical space around you where nothing can touch you. So, next time somebody sends you an email that's, about the Triangle of Life, please let them know that that's a bunch of baloney, that every single first responder and emergency management agency, pretty much everywhere in the world, has said this is a horrible idea and could kill people.
Yes, that's true.
Rainbow pony.
So any other questions out here? There's a lady in the back again.
Yeah, I can't see back there. Well, your turn again.
Yep.
You've talked about the subduction zone quake.
Yes.
We talked about the tsunami. I was particularly interested in looking at what would happen with the Columbia and the Willamette.
So the question is, if we get this giant earthquake and it generates a tsunami, how will it affect the Columbia and the Willamette? Nobody's really sure. A lot of geologists say the water from the tsunami is probably not going to get much past Astoria, because the bay there is 5 miles wide, so a lot of the energy from the tsunami dissipates. But I have a friend who's a geophysicist who says that we will see surges on the Willamette all the way to Portland. There are tidal surges at the base of Bonneville Dam. So if it's tide coming in, the tsunami could certainly be pushing water in with it. There's a phenomenon in these big earthquakes called a seach. That's where water starts sloshing because it's resonating with these long period earthquake waves. So in a bathtub, you got the water going, that's a little tiny seach. Well, when it happens in a large body of water, like a river, it can be splashing some pretty serious water. I would not want to be at Tom McCall Waterfront Park besides the fact that it's going to be sliding into the Willamette, but there may be water sloshing out. And a siege, because earthquake waves travel through the earth, can happen anywhere on Earth. The Chilean earthquake in 2010 caused sieges on Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans. They can happen anywhere. The water just starts resonating with these long period waves. If you got a swimming pool in your backyard, you're in for a show.
One more quick question about one of the other dangers of earthquakes in general being liquefaction. What differences would there be in a subduction zone quake? Would that damage just be pretty much total from the get-go?
So the question is, what is the effect of liquefaction in a subduction zone earthquake? Liquefaction is where basically the water-saturated soils turn to quicksand, and buildings can settle, and cars and everything else can settle. And the longer you shake something, the more liquefaction happens. So if you've got an earthquake that's lasting minutes and minutes and minutes, then you're going to see a lot of liquefaction. It doesn't mean that the buildings are falling over or anything like that. I've seen lots of video from Tokyo, which is about 250 miles from the epicenter of the earthquake, but built on a bay, basically filled in on a bay. And the worst that the liquefaction was, cars sank about halfway into the ground, the water-saturated soils. Heavens knows we don't have a lot of water-saturated soils here, so it's really not going to be a problem. You know, you've got much more important things to worry about than if things are going to liquefy, is what I tell people. It's an effect of an earthquake. It's going to happen. It's going to happen all over the place. Nobody's sure. I mean, you can pretty much guess where loose, sandy, water-saturated soils are. Those are going to liquefy. Yes, ma'am. One of you. Or combine your question.
Is it still not safe to get into a door frame?
The question is, what about door frames? Everybody was taught that, get under a table or get in a door frame. The conventional wisdom now is do not get in door frames. And one of the reasons is, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, in office buildings, walls aren't connected to anything in many instances, so the door frame's not going to do you much good. The other is at home, if you got heavy doors and they start swinging back and forth, especially with these long period waves, they could be crunching on body parts and just not a good idea. Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk about the sinkholes and the New Madrid fault? There's a lot of things going on geologically with the sinkholes. Are they related to the earthquakes, or will be, or? So
that's a pretty interesting, far-reaching question. So you want me to talk about the New Madrid fault? New Madrid fault is actually.
Well, pardon me.
So there's a huge fault in the central part of the United States, in the Mississippi Valley. Stretches. It's over kind of centered around the Missouri-Tennessee border and then going north. In 1811 and 1812, it let go a couple of magnitude 2 or 3 or 4 magnitude 8 earthquakes, caused waterfalls on the Mississippi. Now the interesting thing is, up until this new research by Chris Goldfinger, U.S. Geological Survey said we had about a 10 to 15% chance of getting one of these subduction zone earthquakes in the next 50 years. Now they say, yeah, it's probably more like 40% in the next 50 years. That's like 50-50 chance it's going to happen in the next 50 years, folks. The New Madrid fault, sorry. Guess what they say the probability is for it? 10 to 15% chance in the next 50 years. But it hasn't been as well studied as ours. So I guarantee 5 years from now, they'll be saying, oh, maybe a 40% chance. And sinkholes are just, they can be effects of earthquakes, or they can happen without earthquakes. I have lots of useless knowledge.
The point being here is that it's time to prepare. The numbers are getting tighter and tighter as they do more and more research. So those of you who are CERT members in here, go back and start getting your neighborhoods organized. We told you that time and time again across the city of Salem, and it's time to do it. Not to scare you, but it's time to get that 8% of everybody who start moving that up. And plan those picnics in your neighborhood. Neighborhood night out takes a whole new meaning. And start doing that planning with your neighbors, because that's where it'll be. Or even at your office building, because you spend a lot of time at your office building. So we're here to help in the Salem area.
And if you got an organization that you think might benefit from having me come out and scare the what out of them, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you very much for coming tonight.